No, you don't need the.
I'm doing this my way.
He a legend, he a legend, he a legend. He a legend, he a legend, he a legend.
Talking on it though, then
He a
you can't work it
legend.
up later.
Welcome to the league, to the league, to the league, to the league, to the league of items. Welcome to the league, to the league, to the league, to the league, to the league of items.
What's up, everybody? It's Pikel with League of Items, and in today's video we are going to discuss how to fix Vitality and how to create a playoff contender using players who did not make playoffs in the LPL and in the LCK. I started off making this video thinking about it from the other perspective of just trying to create playoff contenders with teams that did not make playoffs, but then obviously in the LEC most of the good players that are left are on Vitality. So we're going to take a look at how to fix Vitality, which is pretty important. It's significant for the European region as a whole because there are a lot of good players there. It's not the easiest to do, but we'll talk about my thoughts on that. Before we talk about that, let's talk about Underdog Fantasy. So Underdog Fantasy is a great fantasy website for League of Legends, but also for CSGO and football, which is coming up shortly. They have over-unders for League of Legends. They have rivals where you pick between two players on the same team for who will have more kills in a given match. And then for the NFL, they have best ball. So best ball is a lot of fun. You draft a team before the season starts, and then you can join like big competitions and potentially win millions of dollars. A couple of the top spots are worth millions, and it's unlikely that you'll win. But it's possible. So if you want to check out Underdog Fantasy, make sure to use my promo code PIKEL or use the link in the description below. But let's talk about Vitality first. So I think that Vitality, it's pretty easy to fix them. They fell out of playoffs because they lost 3 matches in the last week, I believe. They lost to... Well, they've lost 3 consecutive games, including a tiebreaker. So first they lost to SK, bad loss. Then they lost to Fnatic, which happens. And then they lost to Rogue, which happens. And then they lost to XL, which, again, like XL's not a horrible team, but Vitality should definitely win one of those 3 games. And then they're not in this situation, so it's pretty sad, if you ask me. As is, like if you didn't change Vitality's roster at all, I still think that they're capable of winning a split in the LEC. I think that they're just as talented as teams like G2, Mad Lions, Rogue, Fnatic, XL. I think all those teams are very not very. They're all talented and they're all close enough where it makes sense that 6 of those teams are in the playoffs. Misfits, I think, are a little less talented than the rest of the teams that are in playoffs, so I don't expect them to really do anything. We'll talk about that in a separate video. But for this video, I do think that Alphari with Haru or Selfmade could probably win a title. However, I think the best case scenario for a team like this is to retool around players they already have within their organization. So obviously in this picture we have Alphari, Carzzy, and Perks. These 3 players are all very highly thought of in the European community, but also like around the world. Mostly Alphari and Perks. Carzzy was successful while on Mad Lions, but then after the whole blowout he had with the Mad Lions organization, came over to Vitality, and they were trying to incorporate him onto their team as a carry player, but Carzzy was always better as a utility AD carry, really wasn't one of the best Jinx players or Aphelios players in the region, which is, it's not necessarily a bad thing, but when the meta is focused around those champions, he's going to look less solid. I remember watching one of the matches during last year's playoffs, like right in the beginning of playoffs, and Carzzy was talking about how he thought that the Aphelios side was the better side of the Jinx Aphelios matchup, and that kind of told me all I needed to know about Carzzy. I think that a lot of people probably believe in that, but the Jinx side is better. It's just more forgiving. It's the easier side of the matchup. You're going to win more likely if you're on the Jinx side. If you play the Aphelios aggressive enough, then yes, you can turn that matchup. But all the statistics worldwide suggest that the Jinx side is much better than the Aphelios side of that matchup. And that was only one of the metas, but that just tells me that even when there's an overwhelming amount of evidence in these 80 carry matchups, Carzzy is the kind of person who's going to advocate for the lesser side of a matchup for reasons X, Y, or Z. So that probably played out in a similar way with all like the Zeri, Kalista, Twitch, like these champions that aren't necessarily the most common long term, but they became much more popular during this split, and that became a problem for Vitality. It wasn't as easy for him to be a true carry in a lot of these games. And you look at the 80 carries that are left in playoffs. I mean, Flocked, I don't think that Flocked or Unforgiven or Comp or Neon are much better than Carzzy. I think that Upset and Patrick are both definitely better than Carzzy. More well-rounded 80 carries. So that is a problem for a team like Vitality in the future, unless they force a utility meta onto their roster. Like if you're always drafting around utility, I think that Carzzy is fine as long as he's not the focal point. Some drafts you could probably make him the focal point depending on matchups with the enemy team. In terms of talent, like if you're going up against Upset or if you're going up against Patrick, you probably don't want to go hard carry versus hard carry. But against any of those other teams, you could play an early or mid-game champion that can do a job in the early and mid-game and then get to the point where somebody else on the team can carry. So next, let's talk about Alphari. Alphari, if you just talent from a talent perspective, like, are you going to tell me that Broken Blade, Armut, Odoamne, Irrelevant, Wonder, and Finn are all better than Alphari? The answer is pretty clearly no. For one reason or another, Alphari has failed on multiple teams, and I think part of it comes down to drafting, which isn't really Alphari's fault as much as it is a reality when Alphari is on your team. Like, he basically demands being a carry for the team, which can be a good thing and it can be a bad team. I mean, if you look at teams like T1, they're able to play around Zeus. Whether or not Alphari has a talent discrepancy big enough to justify playing around him, like, it is possible to get your top laner into more advantageous positions. Vitality, I really do think that their drafts were questionable a lot of the time. For example, in their match today against XL in a game that's potentially going to decide your season, they had Alphari on Kennen. When you think of Alphari, can he play Kennen? Yes. Is Kennen his best champion? I don't think so. And is it going to give him the most potential to carry a game on his own? I don't think so. And I'm sure that's very frustrating for Alphari. I think that it's unlikely that we see Alphari, Perks, and Carzzy all on this team again. But if they ran it back, I think that it would be okay, as long as they make some other changes. Now let's talk about Perks. So Perks is still a very good mid laner. I mean, Caps is probably better than him, but Niski is not better than him. Larson might be better than him. Vetio might be better than him. Humanoid might be better than him. Nuke Duck is not. So he's still definitely a top 5 mid laner in the region. I know that he didn't have a great year this year, but he's still an upper echelon mid laner. He's one of the best mid laners in Western history. You're not just going to fall off of a cliff. He still made some big plays. It's just, sometimes it's consistency issues. But you should also, I mean, it's tough to put so much emphasis on the drafts, but I can't think of many other reasons, because the alternative is that I need to say Perks is not good, and I just don't think that that's the case. So let's move on to the quote unquote new players that would be pushing Vitality over the top and turning them into a contender. The first player is Bo. So Bo is the player in the top left. He is a jungler who came over from the LPL. He was banned previously for match fixing, but Vitality scooped him up, and I think that he is a very good carry jungler. He was extremely good during the hard carry meta of last year for FPX, before he got in trouble for match fixing. And he was pretty dominant in a lot of the games that he played. His team was also, fairly good. So it was tough to kind of figure out, should he be giving a ton of credit to Bo, or should he be giving more credit to the fact that he's on a team that's winning games? But at the end of the day, I think he was contributing heavily to that, and his team was deciding to play around him, which is very good. And that could be a good thing for players like Alfari and Perks, where you have a jungler who's basically demanding attention from the enemy team. It takes some pressure off your solo laners, and it also allows them to play for somebody else as well. And the drafts would probably be... they would still be pretty neutral, I think, for the solo laners, because you're going to want to get Bo into the best matchup possible instead of saving counter pick for the mid laner or the top laner. You might want to just try to save Bo's pick as long as possible to put him on a jungler that could carry the game eventually. Now, if there's a super overpowered jungler, then yes, like every time you're blue side, you're just going to pick the best jungler possible, and then you'll still be able to draft for your solo laners. But even in a less advantageous jungle meta where the top junglers are not as clear, or there's more variety, he would still be pretty good. He could still be drafted around. And apparently he's been destroying in solo queue, so I think that's another good sign, and I think that he will ultimately be the jungler for Vitality next year. I think that the most likely thing is for Perks and Bo to definitely come back and then figure out the rest of the team. If Alfari likes playing with Perks and thinks that Bo is going to be an upgrade over Haru, then I could see him sticking around. If he has issues with Perks, or if he has issues with Karzi, then he might force his way onto a different team. But in order for this kind of team to be successful, I think that it really demands a new support, and I don't think that Labrov was really the problem. I'm sure it's very difficult to play on a team with a bunch of very good players and then kind of be thrown in there and just don't mess everything up. And some people might want to blame him because he's the smallest name on the team. But this isn't really a video about Labrov. It's a video about Junghoon. So Junghoon is one of the most interesting support players in the LEC. I think that I would rather have him than Targamas, and it's close. Targamas is pretty good. I'd rather have him than Kaiser. I'd rather have him than Trimby, but again, Trimby's pretty good. Mursa, I'd rather have Junghoon. Hillsong is a more experienced version of Junghoon, but I think that Junghoon could be that level of player. And then Mickey versus Junghoon, it's pretty close. But that's the level that I think he's on. I think that he could be just as good as Mickey or Hillsong if he's on a more successful team, and he has the playmaking upside. He has the ability to be the best player on the Rift sometimes, and that's really not common for supports. One player who is almost always the best player in a game is Keria. Keria from T1 is one of the best players, if not the best player in the world. I don't think that Junghoon is at that level, because Keria might even be younger than Junghoon, and he'll be the best support and one of the best players in the world for the next couple of years. But Junghoon, his playmaking ability, I think would fit in perfectly for Vitality, because you need, with this roster, I think that if you have Bo constantly pressuring the opposing jungler by invading, playing a farm style jungler that forces the other team to kind of make plays, would be a good starting point for a Vitality roster that lets Perks and Alfari kind of play laning phase as per usual. So instead of them being the focal points of the early and mid game, the focus will be on the jungler. And then you'll have Junghoon, who's able to leave Karzi alone in the bot lane and try to make an influence in mid lane, jungle, top lane, because he has that playmaking upside. So I think that'd be a really nice roster. I think that that would have the potential to win, the LEC spring and summer, go to Worlds, and I think they'd be pretty good at Worlds. And all this depends on Perks staying about the same level, Alfari staying about the same level, Karzi playing mostly utility carries where he's not the focal point of the team. And if those three things can happen, bring in a playmaking support, bring in a farming jungler that has big upside and a ton of talent, that could be a very exciting roster. Next up, let's talk about the LCK. So the LCK is another region that is pretty difficult to build a team from scratch because there are only 4 teams that did not make playoffs. So we have Hamalife, Fredit Briand, Nongshim, and Kwangdong. So in order to make a team out of these players, I don't want Dudu, I don't want Onfleek, I don't want Karis, I don't want Chioni, I don't want Samdi, I don't want Vista. I would consider Willer, but I think that Dread is just as good, if not better, than Willer. But Willer last year was actually a pretty good player. Then on Fredit Briand, we have Morgan, Umti, Lava, Henna, and Delight. Morgan, again, is a pretty good player, but he's not better than Kana. So really, we're left with taking 3 players from Nongshim Red Force and 2 players from Kwangdong Freaks. I think that Kana is still one of the best top laners in the world. His team has been brutal all year. I think that Ghost was a really big liability for his team throughout the split, and it was tough for them to kind of get anything going because other teams know how good Kana is. But if you gave me Kana, Dread, and BDD on a roster with Teddy and Hoyt from Kwangdong Freaks, I think that now you're working with something. The problem is that the LCK is just super talented, and it'd be really tough for them to take a series off of any of the teams above them. I think that even with this roster, DRX is better than them. I think Kingen, Piosik, Zika, Deft, and Beryl is a very good roster. If you put Kana onto DRX, I think that they're better. But we're not doing that. Then for somebody like KT Rolster, Rascal, Cuz, Arya, or Vikla, I think Vikla's been playing more often recently. Aiming and Life, I would prefer Kana. I would prefer Dread, but it's close. And I would prefer BDD, but it's close. Like, Vikla has had some good games. So, like, this team, the hybrid of Nongshim and Kwangdong Freaks, I think they could probably beat KT Rolster in a series. But it's not, like, it's not obvious that the Nongshim Freaks is not lopsided or anything like that. But then you get to, like, Damwon. Like, they're not beating Damwon. Noguri, Canyon, Showmaker, Deokdom, and Kellen. This team would never be better than that. Sandbox, it's questionable. Like, Sandbox is a good roster. I think that Closer and Prince are much better than BDD and Teddy at this point. They are just, very good young players. If you took them and threw them onto this team, I think that that would actually be a team that has the potential to do some damage. I don't think that Sandbox in its current iteration is going to be able to beat Gen.G or T1 in playoffs. It's possible. Like, Closer and Prince are very, very good, but I think that once you get into playoffs and T1 and Gen.G have more time to kind of look at the film of Sandbox and prepare strategies specifically for them in playoffs, I think that we'll most likely see Sandbox meet their match and ultimately lose. So that's the tough thing. Like I said, in the LCK, you have 3 teams that are, like, insanely good. And then Sandbox is question mark, and then DRX is question mark. Like, I do like both of those teams, but it's tough to say really how reasonable it is to craft a team that can beat Gen.G or T1. You'd probably need you would probably need all 8 of those other teams to build a team that could beat one of those rosters, which would be fun, but that's not this video. And then last but not least, we have the LPL. So for the LPL, I think you could actually make a very good team with make a good team with the players who did not make playoffs. So for this, we have Anyone's Legend, Thundertalk Gaming, Invictus Gaming, LGD, Ultra Prime, Rare Atom, and Team World Elite. I think that from Team World Elite, I would consider using Beishang. I think that Beishang is an incredibly good jungler. It's unfortunate that World Elite was not able to, be competitive since they have had a decent number of good players the past couple of years. It's just, Jiameng left. So it's tough when your AD carry leaves. Obviously, name changed to Elk, but he was very good. A team like Rare Atom, iBoy is perennially overrated. He's not as good as Jiameng. I'd rather have Jiameng. Ultra Prime, I think that Zoom is probably still good enough to be on a good team, but it just didn't fit in well with this meta. I think that Elk and Xiaoxi, aka Jiameng and Xiaoxi, this is Elk / Jiameng. His name was Jiameng before he switched over to Elk. Like, they are a very good bot lane. It's really tough to demonstrate that when you're constantly losing. I think that Hacker and Cryan were pretty big liabilities for their team. And if you put this bot lane onto a better team, I think that it would be pretty clear how good they are. At least, that's what I believe. Then LGD. LGD, after coming off of their big win over RNG, is pretty funny. I mean, Shadow, I think that Shadow will eventually go back to the West. He's a pretty good player. Assam, it'd be interesting to see what happens with him next year. Yedge and Hai Chao. I think Yedge is the one who's been playing more recently. For Invictus Gaming, we have Shun. I think that Shun is probably the better jungler between him and Beishang. So we would definitely start off our team with Shun. If I had to pick one player, it would be Shun or Jiameng. But for this video, I think Shun could be the star player you're building around. He's going to get the most attention. He's going to get the most draft resources. Play everything around him. I also took Zika from Invictus Gaming. You could argue between ZDZ and Zika, which one is better. I don't really care. Pick one, and I'm happy with either. Mole was a question mark for me. I like Mole a lot. I think that he has really good upside and is just like a good glue player for a lot of teams. But I decided to go with UCal from Thunder Talk instead. And then, On and Wink had some good matches at the end of the year. I'm just not convinced that I'd want them as my bot lane, especially not over Elk and Xiaoxi. And then, last but not least, on Anyone's Legend, they started off the split really good, but they kind of fell off, which is not totally surprising. I know that Jay Skelts is probably upset about that. But ZDZ, Xiao Hao, Forge, Betty, Chow Chow, just not good enough. But this team that we've built, I think that they'd be a pretty competitive team. Again, it's difficult because there are a lot of good teams in the LPL. I think that right now, I think that this team would be able to beat Billy Gaming. I think they'd be able to beat FPX. They'd be very competitive with OMG. And then you get to teams like LNG. So a team like LNG, ZDZ or Zika against Ale, I think it's draft dependent. Shun against Tarzan, I think that Shun would have a slight advantage from a drafting perspective. He is more often going to be on the farm side of these matchups, which is going to force Tarzan to look for early game advantages. The problem is that he is very good at that and is capable of doing that. Duanbi against UCal, I think that this is another interesting matchup because UCal can be more greedy than Duanbi is a lot of the time. Duanbi is capable of being greedy. He just drafts to try to help out his team, and he's one of the best team-focused mid laners in the world, which is why it's so fun watching him. He has such an insane champion pool. And then we have Light and Lumao or Light and Elwandi. I think that Elk and Xiaoxi are just as good as them, if not better. So that'd be an interesting matchup. I do think that LNG would ultimately pull it off because Tarzan is that good in the early game. But it's at least an interesting thought experiment. Weibo Gaming against this team. I mean, Weibo Gaming can beat anybody and lose to anybody. So they could beat them in a best of 5. But EDG, RNG, V5, JDG, Top Esports, those are some pretty tough matchups. I think that it'd be fun to watch this team play at least, and they'd be competitive. I think that they're definitely a playoff caliber team. I don't know if they are an elite team, and the reason why they might not be an elite team capable of winning the title is because when you're in a league like the LPL, you really need one of the best players in the world to be competitive. And I think you might potentially have that with Shun, you might have that with Elk, you might have that with ZDZ or Zika. You probably don't get that with UCal, and you probably don't get that with Xiaoxi. So you need to you need to hit on Shun, Beishang, or Jiameng. If 2 of those 3 players are super good, then you could compete for a title. Because then the other players are good enough, I think. But that's basically it. So I hope you thought this video was interesting. Like I said, I think that Vitality is right there. It's super sad that they were not able to figure it out this split. I think a lot of that comes down to coaching. There were a decent number of teams that struggled with coaching this year. A team like BLG comes to mind. Vitality comes to mind. But you know, it's tough to say like what the alternative would be, or if the coaches were given enough power to kind of dictate what was going on in drafts. But yeah, that's basically it. Like I said before, if you want to help support the channel, the best thing to do at this point is to sign up for Underdog Fantasy using my promo code PIKEL, or using the link in the description below. They will do a deposit match up to $100. So if you're going to play on Underdog for like the NFL or the playoffs for League of Legends or League of Legends for Worlds, that would be a good way to help support the channel and also get some extra value out of your money that you're depositing onto Underdog. So thanks for watching, and I'll talk to you later.